Happy Friday. Welcome to yet another Leader Factor Live. We wanted to pop in for just a few minutes today. We'll probably take 15 to 20, similar to what we did last week. So we have a brief agenda. We're going to go through just a couple slides with you today and talk about psychological safety, tell you about some of the upcoming things that are happening in our community, some announcements that we're going to make, some free resources, and a giveaway. So I guess we are talking about several things today. And joining me today in our live is Dr. Timothy Clark. Tim, thanks for making time to be with us today.
It's good to be here, Junior. Look forward to our conversation.
How's your week been?
It's going well. It's working on some exciting things. Couple new articles, working on the ladder of vulnerability, which we posted on a few days ago, but we're putting that asset together, and that's pretty exciting. We've been working on that for several months.
That's going to be a cool one.
It really is.
One of the things that I was working on this morning, we didn't have a chance to catch up after our morning huddle, but we went through some of the most recent survey data. So many of you are familiar with the 4 stages of psychological safety, and some of you are familiar with the team survey as well. So there's a survey tool based on the book. And over the last, I think, 8-9 days, we've had an additional 25,000 data points. And it's been interesting to look at that. So we're looking at the distributions, we were looking at challenger safety, we were looking at some of the patterns, and it was cool to take a minute this morning and see some of what's happening on the survey side of things. So little sneak peek for everybody that's listening. There are some interesting trends with challenger safety, specifically feeling like you can take reasonable risks without being punished. That was one that over the last 7-8 days has been performing lower than the mean for that question in our normative database. So it's just interesting to see some of the organizations that have been doing surveys and some of the responses that are pouring in. And we had a few people from our technology team going through and showing us some of the distributions and some of the stats, which really cool.
That's a lot of data points in a very short amount of time.
It's a lot. Before you know it, we'll be at 1 million data points.
I know.
And that'll be the day. That'll be really cool. We're excited.
The patterns become pretty clear.
They become so clear.
And when the data is coming in from all over the world, you have patterns that cut across demographics, they cut across cultures.
Yep.
And it just comes into sharp relief, doesn't it?
I think that's my biggest takeaway from today. So we've done a lot of international surveying over the last little while. And what's been fascinating to me is the data and the distribution across all questions is almost identical internationally as it is domestic.
Yeah.
And also across languages. And some of the geographies that we're surveying, some of these organizations are culturally very different than the United States, as an example, or North America generally. And what is so fascinating to me about that is it's indicative of the commonality in the human experience and the vulnerability that we all feel, regardless of geography, regardless of organization, regardless of position. And so the data is coming back and it's like, well, really the commonality is that you're human. Yeah. And I think that that's really interesting. There aren't massive differences across cultures. And the way that things show up in the details is certainly different, right? Yeah. There are differences, but the core components of what makes us human and this idea of vulnerability is present everywhere.
It is. It underlies everything. So we do have cultural differences, but the cultural common the universal common pattern that underlies all of that, it's consistent throughout the world. It's amazing.
And speaking of the world, hello from Uruguay. Thank you for everybody that's listening. I know we've got quite the global audience, and so if you are listening from wherever you are, go ahead and put where you're listening from in the comments. We'd be interested to see. We like to do that on our webinars. These, we don't get the type of audience that we do for the webinars, but it is interesting to see where people are coming from. So really cool. Okay, so let's jump into it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just go through a couple announcements. So you'll see here the ebook. We announced this last week. This is available. Wales. Jamie, thanks for joining us.
And
So, Egypt. Very, very cool. That's fantastic.
That's pretty good.
So the ebook that has been released recently. So go ahead and check that out if you haven't had an opportunity to do that. It's about 35 pages answering the question, what is psychological safety? So go ahead and hit the website. We'll go ahead and put a link to that as well, but you can go to leaderfactor.com and find it pretty easily under what is psychological safety. That's a very helpful resource. If you think that it would be helpful for your organization, colleagues, peers, go ahead and share it. That is a completely free resource for you to consume and to share. Okay, the next thing that we wanted to talk about today is the team transformation giveaway. We're just going to tease this. I'll talk about it in a few minutes. But you've probably seen Dr. Clark's recent LinkedIn post on the team transformation giveaway. Just know that we will be giving away an entire team transformation. Depending on your team size, that can be up to a couple $1,000s of value. So we're excited about that, and I'll talk about the details in a little bit. Okay, so Tim, really the topic of conversation for today is one single component of the 4 stages model.
Yeah.
So most of you are probably familiar with this, the 4 stages of psychological safety model. And we're not going to talk about the whole thing, and we're not going to talk about every part today. We just wanted to focus on the inclusion threshold and this little box down here of exclusion, the very first thing that you see on this model. So, Tim, maybe define the axes for us, get us oriented, and then we can talk, kind of crack this open a little bit.
Right. So let's go back to the fundamental definition of psychological safety. 5 words, right? So an environment of rewarded vulnerability. But now we have to deconstruct that. And so now we're going to talk about the linear progression of psychological safety. Psychological safety is a function of respect, which you see on the vertical axis, and permission, which you see on the horizontal axis. So that gives us the fusion of those 2 dimensions gives us a level of psychological safety, a degree. Could be low, could be high, could be somewhere in the middle. But even before that, we begin in a state of exclusion. Do you see that down in the lower left-hand corner? Exclusion. Before humans come together and begin interacting on any kind of basis, they're in a state of exclusion. When they start interacting, the formation of norms begins immediately in any human collective. So we start to interact and the norms emerge. And then what happens is, as we get to know each other and as those norms emerge, we cross the threshold from inclusion to from exclusion to stage 1 inclusion safety. But here's the caveat, or here's the qualification. Even when we interact, it doesn't mean that we're going to cross over into inclusion safety. There are many times when, in spite of our interactions or because of our interactions, we exclude people. So the interactions are not helping, they're actually hurting. Right? So we might think, oh, well, if we start to interact, then we're going to naturally include people. Kindergartners do that.
Yeah.
They're pretty good at that.
Yeah.
And that's why I say in the book, we include naturally in childhood and we exclude unnaturally in adulthood. So those interactions can become exclusive. And so some people, a portion of the population, a portion of the team, they're marginalized.
Yeah.
They're still excluded. And so guess what? If you go throughout the world and you look at organizations and you look at teams, there are still people that have been working and interacting in those social units, and they still are in a state, or they consider themselves, they feel that they're in a state of exclusion, even though they are formally members of the team. Socioculturally, they have not been integrated. They have not been accepted. They don't feel a sense of belonging. That's what we're talking about, right, Junior?
Yeah, one of the things that I've been thinking about in regard to the exclusion box is that it's not always an active place. So let me share what I mean by that. When we talk about exclusion, a lot of time, at least this is the way that I perceive it. It seems active. It seems like I'm deliberately excluding you. I'm treating you poorly. But one of the things that I've spent time thinking about over the last week is that it can be passive,
Mhm.
and that the very act of not including someone
Yes,
can be an exclusive act
that's
in
right.
and of itself. So it's omission. And to me, that's fairly interesting
Yeah.
because by nature, I would say that I'm fairly introverted. And if we're on the spectrum of introversion to extroversion, I probably lean a little bit on the introverted side, believe it or not, for those of you who interact with me perhaps professionally. But that's my leaning, and so I've found that that can come off as exclusive just because I'm not saying anything, right?
Yeah.
I'm not engaging in any way, and so that's been an interesting thing for me to think about. Is I have to be proactive. I have to introduce myself. I have to ask someone else what their name is, and reach out my hand and get to know the person. And so that's kind of my takeaway from this today as we highlight exclusion.
Well, it's a really good point, Junior, because a lot of times people will say they'll report that they don't feel included,
Yeah.
like that they have not crossed the threshold into stage one inclusion safety. But
Yep.
then when you ask them, they'll say, well, no one reached out to me. No one said
Yeah.
hello. No one
Yep.
introduced themselves. No one did any of that. Well, was anybody overtly exclusive? Were they
Yeah.
destructive? Were they hurtful? Were they marginalizing you? Were they embarrassed? No.
Has this
They
ever
just didn't
happened
reach
to
out.
you? Has this ever happened to you guys? If anybody that's listening, go ahead and like or comment if this has happened to you. Tim,
Yeah.
go on. I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is an important part.
So what it does is it helps us understand that there's a responsibility to be active. That's part of the stewardship to reach out. And
Yep.
that's why if you go back to the behavioral guide, the behaviors that are associated with stage one inclusion safety that create inclusion safety as a natural consequence,
Mm-hmm.
they include these these acts that we need to engage in, right? Because otherwise, look at the danger of people feeling excluded when nothing happens. Well, it's because nothing
Yep.
happens.
Yep.
Very
Yep.
interesting.
Precisely. Okay, we're going to move on. If you want to learn more about this model, go ahead and check out the book. It's in the ebook as well. So there's a link to that for those of you that are just joining us. That should be in the chat and as a comment. So you can pick that up after the fact. Okay, we want to talk about this quote for just a second. This one, let me read it. Speaking first when you hold positional power softly censors your team. Okay, so let's unpack this because there's a lot here. Speaking first. What we mean by that is when there's an opportunity to speak, let's say you're in a meeting, you're going first. Okay, out the gate, you're putting your position on the table, you're engaging out the jump, you are the one that is talking. Okay, that's what we mean by speaking first. When you hold positional power, Tim, what's positional power?
Positional power means that you're the authority. You have maybe the formal managerial role. You're in charge.
Okay.
So when you hold positional power, then by definition, there's a power differential between you and the other people. And
Yeah.
so that's a reality coming into the interaction.
Yeah. And how often is there a conversation where there's a power differential?
When is there not?
Yeah, exactly. That's really the question. And so this is almost always relevant.
Yeah.
And then the last part softly censors your team. So, Tim, tell us a little bit about why you put this sentence on paper. What does this mean to you? What do you mean by it?
So it triggers the self-censoring instinct that we all have, but it does it softly, more gently, not
Mhm.
not not aggressively or overtly. And it's simply by virtue of the fact that you went first and
Mhm.
you have positional power. And so I need to emphasize this point. When it comes to dialogue and discussion and collaboration when you're trying to solve a problem or you're trying to make a decision with a team, sequence matters. It matters a great deal because the distribution of power is not equal. And everybody knows that. It's not lost on anyone.
Yeah.
Therefore, sequence matters. So if you hold positional power, when do you weigh in? Not at first.
Not at first.
Not at first, right?
To me, one of the things that I think a lot about is that this is true, all else equal. So my message could be exactly the same, and I could have a wonderfully crafted, tactful message, but it could still censor the team just by sequence.
Based on sequence.
Just based on sequence. That is my biggest takeaway from this, and probably a practical tip to everybody that's listening. That sequence alone can make the difference. You could have the most beautifully well thought, crafted message, but if the sequence is wrong, then it can lose its punch and you can do damage just by going first. It may seem crazy, but it's true.
Yeah. And you don't realize it, but if you go first, you marginalize your people.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not sometimes you'll see leaders doing this unwittingly, unknowingly. They're not doing it on purpose, but they're lacking self-awareness concerning group dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
If you hold positional power, then you go last. The sequence is massively important because you're also validating everyone because you're going in to listen first, to hear people out, to focus on comprehension.
Yep.
And that's the way that it needs to go. Otherwise, you're going to get a very different dynamic.
And it's also important to point out that's the skill that we should deploy in tandem is listening.
Yep.
Because if you're in there and you're disengaged and uninvolved until it's your time to talk, that's also not the best approach.
Junior, I was with an executive team not long ago in San Francisco, and the CEO. So I was there with the executive team, and they were all together. There's about 10 of them.
Yeah.
And we were discussing something. And then what did the CEO do? He got out his laptop, opened up his laptop, and started working.
In the meeting?
In the meeting.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't. It was insulting to every
as if no one was watching.
Yeah. So that is what you call culturally tone deaf.
Yeah, I love.
And if you don't think there are consequences for that, And his response after when we debriefed was, "Oh, it's no big deal."
Yeah.
If you think that's no big deal, you are acutely lacking in self-awareness.
Yeah.
Right? It's a huge deal.
And we're not dismissing the fact that whatever he was working on was probably important, and there are fires to be put out, but there are ways to approach these things.
That's right.
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay, let's go to the next question that we would all like us to ask ourselves, or like you'd ask ourselves, we ask ourselves this question. Are you emotionally advanced beyond needing to hear yourself talk? That's a pointed question. Yeah. It's a little pokey, isn't it, Tim?
It's a little pokey, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a little pokey.
Yeah.
So are you emotionally advanced beyond needing to hear yourself talk? So this goes hand in glove with the previous statement. Is one of the traps that we often fall into is that we like to hear ourselves talk. And we put our own ideas on a pedestal simply by virtue of where they came from, which was us. And so if we're the originator of the idea or the comment or the perceived path forward, we like to let everyone hear about that. And sometimes it's not even valuable. We'll just proliferate and we'll just go on and on and on. And that is censoring. In the act of doing that, everyone else is getting shut down.
Yeah.
Why do you ask it this way though, Tim? Emotionally advanced. What's emotionally advanced about not needing to hear yourself talk?
Well, I think it means that you've graduated to the final stage of confidence as a
Mm,
leader.
mm,
And what that means is that you've lost the preoccupation to be the show.
yeah,
You don't need to be on stage. You don't need the airtime. You've graduated.
I like that.
And when you graduate, it's a blessed day. It's so refreshing because now your focus, right? The preoccupation has come off of you.
Yep.
And now the focus is on others and it's on the work and it's on what we're trying to accomplish.
Mm,
That is a beautiful thing. But there are
mm,
so many leaders that have not graduated, right? They haven't made the emotional and the psychological transition. And so they're still obsessing, they're still preoccupied with themselves.
yeah.
And it's incredibly annoying,
Let
isn't
me. It absolutely is.
it?
I think about this point a lot, and let me put something on the table. I'm interested in your reaction. In this way, we could say that confidence. It's a quote that I'm just gonna kind of mix up a little bit on purpose,
Mhm.
but it's this idea that the difference between emotional immaturity and emotional maturity, a lack of confidence and confidence, is the difference between when someone comes into a room, you saying, "Here I am," or saying, "There you are." And to me, that is a really interesting way to frame this entire topic that we're discussing right now.
Mhm.
Is weighing in last, not needing to hear yourself talk. I think it's interesting that you pointed at confidence, that that's part of the issue.
Mhm.
It's being externally oriented, looking at other people. How can we collaborate? How can I give value to the situation? How can I let other people engage? How can I serve? Versus, I have all of the answers. Listen to me. I'm going to go first. And so it's this shift. It's almost this 180. And that's very practical, very useful. And
Well,
I
and
think,
but Junior, let's add a point. It goes back to the nature of leadership. Leadership is the organizational application of leverage.
hmm. And thanks, Debbie, for your comment. Thank you all for your
Yeah,
comments.
thanks for your comments. So how do you create leverage? You create leverage by getting outside of yourself, leading through questions rather than answers, being careful about sequence
Hmm.
and when you weigh in. And so you can see that if you can move beyond your insecurities and your ego defense mechanisms, you're going to perform even better. Don't worry about being rewarded and recognized and getting the credit. It will happen indirectly.
Yeah.
Even more will come to you when you stop worrying about it.
Yeah.
Right? It's an irony, it's a paradox about how that works. But the leaders that get there, oh, it's pretty incredible. Everybody wants to work for them.
It's so true. It's
Everybody wants
so
to
true.
work for them, right?
I've seen this time and time and time again across so many organizations, really anywhere, is people love to work for leaders like that. And the opposite is also true. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the giveaway. Thank you for engaging in this part of the conversation with us. I think, Tim, it probably makes sense to do one of these on the ask to tell ratio in the
Yeah.
future. I think that could be an interesting place to go with this. Okay, I'm going to share a different screen. Let's see if I can do this here. And we're going to go here. Okay. Some of you are probably familiar with the team transformation. It's a relatively new offering from Leader Factor, but it includes some interesting components that we've released previously in a really nice package, along with some new resource that Tim really just finished production on with our production team recently with the manager course. So this is the team transformation. And what we mean by transformation is culturally. How do we culturally transform a team? We talk a lot about organizational transformation, but really our focus is at this team level with this offering. So we have the 4 stages online course. Every single person in the team gets access to the course. the four stages team survey. We survey at the beginning to get a baseline and an end to check progress. There's a manager-specific section of the online course. There's facilitation resources for the manager to talk to the team. There's a survey results of dashboard and a team action plan that lasts several weeks, depending on how long you want to do it. And all of that is automated through the platform. That was a lot. I didn't expect to go on for 30 seconds about what's included, but man, the team transformation really is packed. So if you want to learn a little bit more about the team transformation, you can hit up the website. You can see some of the technology and some of the dashboards. All of this is based, of course, on the book, The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. So if you haven't read that, would highly recommend it. We're giving away a team transformation. That's why I'm talking about it. So this is Tim's recent post on LinkedIn just as of a day ago. And so you can see these are the instructions for the giveaway and the steps that you need to follow. So how do you enter to win the team transformation? Follow Leader Factor on LinkedIn if you haven't already. Subscribe to our newsletter at the bottom of leaderfactor.com. Our newsletters are killer, and they're not very salesy compared to a lot of the newsletters that I get. We try and pack those with value. So hopefully those of you that do get the newsletter are enjoying it. We've been doing that for a very long time now. Those things are a wonderful way to stay apprised of what we're doing in the world of psychological safety. And then tag 3 colleagues on LinkedIn in the post, in the comments below. We're going to announce this next week, Friday, October 1st, during our next live event. And this is the kicker here. You must be present during this live event to win. So if you enter, be sure to tune in with us next week. You can see that we've already got about 60 entries. So go ahead and add yourself to this list because there's a pretty good chance that you could win. And there's quite a bit of value tied up in this offering. Okay, the last thing that I want to do before we wrap up here is just recognize one of the members of our certified community. Many of you probably know we run a certification about once a month, and those have been really, really fun. We get 15 people together from all over the world. We spend a half day together talking about psychological safety. And Doug Leonard is one of the participants that wrote us a really nice note here, and I wanted to share that with you today. And Doug, thank you for taking the time to write this. He said, I appreciated the interaction of the participants with Dr. Clark. It was instructive and interesting to hear the varied questions, past and current experiences, and how they all applied in one way or another to the 4 stages of psychological safety. There was a lot of passion in the program. I appreciate the technology portal, the approach to the IP, the newsletter, the group in LinkedIn, and the YouTube videos. There are a lot of resources available to help people succeed in the implementation of the 4 stages to their companies and clients. So thanks, Doug, again, for your kind words. The reason we do these certifications is to help us fulfill our mission. If you don't know what it is, I'll tell you. Our mission is to influence the world for good at scale. One of the things Doug mentioned is passion, that he was impressed with the passion. And that passion comes from the entire group. We, of course, are passionate at Leader Factor about what we do and about psychological safety and making the world a better place. But it's a common thread. And I shouldn't even say thread. It's like a rope that ties this community together is their care for people. Mm-hmm. People that attend these types of things really, really care. And so we're trying to equip our certified community with the tools necessary to influence the world for good through psychological safety, through measurement tools, through training, through coaching. And we are very, very free with our IP. We allow customization. We allow a lot of things that are relatively unique. And the technology is second to none. So if you haven't had a chance to check out the certification, that's also on the website. We've got just 3 sessions left this year. We've sold out every single session for the last 18 months. So go ahead and check that out. If you've been waiting, now is the time because we will not be adding more sessions. So go ahead and check it out. Tim, what else? Anything else that you want to talk about today before we hop off? I appreciate your time.
Man, I wish that we weren't running out of time because I'd like to talk about the talk or the ask to tell ratio, but maybe we can do that next time.
Okay.
That's a really good related concept that we need to get into. So I hope that you'll join us next time. But thanks for the conversation. Thanks for tuning in.
And Brandon, thank you for the shout out on the certification. Brandon was in one of our recent sessions, and we appreciate you.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, thanks for joining us, and thanks for your efforts to create psychological safety in your organizations. It makes all the difference, especially we're still in this pandemic. I mean, I was just on the phone with an executive team this morning, and they're losing engagement over the last few months, and they're trying to figure out what to do. And so this is a challenge that many of us are wrestling with. Psychological safety has to be the center of your efforts.
It sure does. Okay, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Leader Factor LinkedIn Live. I just say Leader Factor Live. I think we're on YouTube, Facebook. We're all over the place. So Leader Factor Live. Thank you for all you do in your workplaces, in your homes, in an effort to promote psychological safety and treat humans the way that humans should be treated. Have a wonderful weekend. We will tune in with you next week. Don't forget about the giveaway. Please register for that. And we hope your team wins. All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.